Welcome to episode 136 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to give quick answers with my best advice to 12 listener-submitted questions. Visit truthforteachers.com to ask your own question or to share your thoughts in the comments. What are the top 10 challenges that teachers face in the classroom? Well, Really Good Stuff released the findings of a national poll, had over 700 teachers answered. You can visit reallygoodstuff.com/solutions to find out the results. Really Good Stuff is the sponsor for this episode. They have teacher tips, resources, and lots of innovative products that are designed to save you time. And they've given us a promo code just for Truth for Teachers listeners. So you can use the code RGSTruth10 and you'll be able to get 10% off of your Really Good Stuff order anytime between now and the end of December 2018. So check that out, reallygoodstuff.com. And now we're going to go ahead and dive into our episode here where we're trying out a different format. This is something brand new and I'm really excited to do it because it's going to give me a chance to answer a lot of questions that I wouldn't be able to answer otherwise. Many of the questions that are submitted to me for this podcast are things that, frankly, I just don't know enough about to develop an entire podcast episode on. Others of them are things that I could answer pretty quickly and probably just, again, couldn't make a whole show around. And some things are just so specific to that person that it really wouldn't make a good episode for everyone else. So I think this will be a really fun way to cover a wide variety of topics in a very short amount of time and still give you a lot of value. We're going to be talking today about how to help kids who struggle with anxiety, how to recover from a terrible day of teaching, how to deal with favoritism from administrators, advice for new and young teachers, what to do when a colleague is bullying you and you have to work with that person. Lots of different things here. Basically, what I'm going to do is give my best piece of advice for each scenario. If I could tell a teacher in that predicament one thing, what would I say? And then we're going to move on, lightning style, to the next question. So all of these questions today came from Instagram. If you want to ask a question, you can go to my Instagram story highlights. You'll see podcast up there in the highlights, and you can use the Ask a Question feature to submit your question to me privately. If you don't use Instagram, you can just go to truthforteachers.com and either type out your question, or there's a link to SpeakPipe, which will allow you to leave me basically a voice message. And I can play your voice message through on the podcast if you want me to. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in here with the first question, which is from Lara, who asks, when you started out teaching, how did you deal with doubts, such as, am I really going to be able to care for every child's individual needs? How did you handle that and the fear of failing? I don't think that those doubts and fears ever go away, right? If you're an experienced teacher and you're listening to this, you're probably nodding your head like, yep, I still wonder if I'm ever going to be able to meet every child's needs. And I think that's part of the reason why so many teachers burn out. So if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to recognize that you're not going to be able to meet every student's needs in every lesson. You're not going to reach them all on the same day, no matter what you do. The goal is to make sure that you're not meeting the needs of the same kids every day, to keep striving and reaching to make sure that you're getting to all of your kids, but it's just not going to happen every single time, every single day. So know that those doubts are normal and try to adjust your expectations of yourself a little bit. Julie said, I would love to hear more about managing my time more efficiently at school. So I have a couple episodes on that. You may want to check out episode 128. It's a coaching call with a 40-hour Teacher Workweek Club member where we did a daily routines makeover. It was really fun. We just looked at all the different places in her day where she was sort of losing time and figuring out how did she want to use her lunch break, her prep time, and that sort of thing. But if I could give you one piece of advice on this, it would be to figure out the most important things that you need to get done and do them first. And that's true in both your instructional time in your lessons and also in your planning time. What is going to really move the needle? Prioritize that thing or those main things, and then if you have time left over, do the other things. But so much of the time we feel like time got away from us because we got distracted by minor stuff that wasn't on the to-do list, stuff that other people asked us to do, stuff that cropped up last minute. And we can't let other people's agendas drive our day. So know what it is that you really want to accomplish and make sure that happens. And that's going to give you a real sense of satisfaction. You're going to feel like you're working much more efficiently at that point. So a person whose identity I'll keep anonymous here said that lesson planning takes a very long time. I'm talking at least 3 hours for one good lesson that meets administrators' requirements. How do you keep from going down a rabbit hole while planning and sticking to a reasonable time frame? I want to say right up front that if you are teaching in a school where you have to spend 3 hours on one good lesson plan, that's a problem. That is not normal. That is not okay. You should not accept that expectation. Absolutely not. Unless you're only teaching one class a day, unless they're giving you all this prep time and this collaborative time with other teachers so you can plan together and you don't have to do it on your own time, and they've lightened your actual instructional workload, you absolutely cannot sustain that. It's ridiculous, and your principal needs to be checked, or your superintendent or whoever is making that directive. So my best piece of advice for you is to ask other teachers in your school how long it's taking them to plan lessons. If it's not taking them that long, if they're not spending 3 hours for one good lesson, ask them how they do it. What are they doing that is allowing them to get this done faster so that you can do the same thing? If they are spending that long, if it's taking them hours and hours and hours for every single lesson to meet the administrator's guidelines, then you all need to organize. You need to go to your principal, take it to the superintendent, however high up you need to go to fight this, because it's not what's best for kids. You cannot spend all your time planning lessons. You need to spend your time being present with kids, being able to adapt and accommodate and do different things for their needs. And if all you're doing is trying to document, try to make it look on paper like you're doing the right thing, then you're not going to have the time and energy and focus to actually do the right thing in the moment. And I encourage you to not allow this to happen. It's not normal. It's not okay. I know that it happens. I've heard from other teachers it happens too. So you're not the only one, but we can't allow this to become the norm in education. We can't let this be a trend where other administrators hear that this kind of thing is happening and feel like it's okay. It's not. Absolutely not. Sorry, I got a little passion on that one. Okay, let's move on to Danielle, who asked, how do I deal with an administrator who openly shows favoritism? There's a lot of variables here, and those include if you have a union, if other teachers are willing to speak up with you, if your principal would be opening to listen, or if he or she would just, sort of deny it or push you out if you speak up and that sort of thing. But if it were me, I would probably look for ways to be quietly subversive. So I don't know if I really coined that phrase, but that's a term that I use a lot. I talk about it in my book, Unshakable. Be quietly subversive. Look for ways to subvert the system without necessarily confronting it head on, unless you think that that's an approach that would work in this situation. A lot of times with favoritism, it's really hard to prove. And so calling it out in the open may or may not work. Quietly subversive in this case may mean looking for ways to recognize other teachers that are often overlooked. It might mean speaking to the people who are always chosen for things so they realize that other people notice that it's happening, and encouraging those teachers to pass the mic a little bit. Let other people share the spotlight. Work together as a school community to shift things instead of just depending on the administrator to make change. It might mean looking for subtle ways to draw attention to this kind of iniquity and try to elevate the people who aren't usually chosen. So look for ways to be quietly subversive if you can't speak up directly about it. That's an approach that's worth trying. Evie asked, how can I streamline all of my hand grading on Friday for tests that have to be returned on Mondays? So my question here would be, who said they have to be returned Monday? I would question that assumption. Ask your team leader, ask your administrator, do they have to be given back on Monday? If they don't, then give yourself extra time. You don't have to return them necessarily on Mondays. Maybe they come back on Tuesdays. That's okay. If they do have to be returned on Monday, then build time into your day on Friday to grade. If anyone questions that, if they wonder why you're grading during the school day, explain that you understood that the tests have to be returned on Monday and you have other time commitments over the weekend. So you want to make sure you get it done. I used to do this because I like the idea of wrapping everything up for the week. I used to try to send home all my graded papers on Friday, actually. So I would give my students extra center time on Friday afternoons, and that would let me catch up on grading, finish up everything, and be able to send it all home that week and start off fresh the next week. And because it was center time, it was something that was valuable for them to do. So see if you can figure out something that would be useful for your kids that wouldn't just feel like busy work or free time or something like that. Something that would be meaningful for them, but that would free you up to be able to catch up on that grading. There's nothing wrong with grading sometimes while students are in class because there's just too much to do outside of class. Not something you want to do all day long, obviously. But if you need to do that on a Friday afternoon, I give you permission. I hope you can give yourself permission. Olivia asked, how do you find professional development that is a good fit for yourself? I think it's really important to think about this. It's an important question, right? How to find PD that is a good fit for yourself. I think there's so much information out there. And the thing is, a lot of professional development directly contradicts other professional development, right? We don't all agree on these ideas, and different experts recommend different things. You can find research or an advocate for pretty much any kind of teaching philosophy or approach that you want. So you really have to think about what is going to fit your personality type, what's going to fit your teaching context, what's going to fit your students' needs. And I think that figuring that out gets easier over time because you're learning through trial and error what doesn't fit. I talked way back in season 1, it was the 7th episode of this podcast, about finding your unique classroom management style. And I tell a story in that episode about how as a 4th-year teacher, I had just moved to a new grade level. I just moved from pre-K to 3rd, and I didn't really know what my classroom management style was going to be like with, these big kids. They seemed big to me after working with 4-year-olds. So I just emulated another teacher, and it was a horrible thing. It did not go well. So you can check out that episode if you want to hear that whole story. By my 5th, 6th, 7th year of teaching, I probably would have known not to do that and that it wasn't going to work out for me. But some of this is still about still discovering who you are in the classroom. So if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to look for people online, look for books, look for resources from people who really resonate with you and with where you're at in your development as a teacher right now. So find something that speaks to you now, knowing what your needs are now and knowing what is a priority for you now. And be aware that those approaches and your sort of gurus or mentors may change later on, and that's okay. Make sure you're trying to learn from a variety of people so that you can be exposed to opposing ideas and so you can learn on a variety of topics instead of just settling on the first one you find. So this goal of making sure that your PD is a good fit for you is a really, really worthy one, and I hope you'll keep working toward it. MD asks for best practices for teachers who share classrooms or who float into several different rooms. So I don't have experience with that myself, but if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to set up really clear expectations about what you need in order to teach well. So if you're going into other people's classrooms and you need students to have their desk cleared, or if you know that you're going to need board space to write on, or you're going to need the LCD projector ready to go, state that specifically to the teacher who's in the room before you. Just say, hey, on your way out the door, can you make sure that one of your kids puts away all the supplies so the tabletops are clear for my activity? And offer that same kind of courtesy to the teacher who uses the room after you. So ask them, is there anything you need me to do so it's easier for you to transition back into teaching here? Those type of things open up the conversation so that you can talk about it. And if things aren't going well, find a time when that teacher isn't in a rush and ask to talk to him or her for just a couple minutes. Ask, how do you feel like it's been going with us sharing the room? I know it can be tough sometimes. Is there anything I'm doing that is making it harder for you to teach? Is there anything I can do to help you? And chances are the other person will reciprocate that question. And even if they don't, it's still now, that's your opportunity for the person to maybe realize that you are pulling your weight and therefore they need to be, aware of that too and pulling their weight as well. Sharing a classroom is a lot like sharing a home, right? The situation is not going to work unless you have agreed upon guidelines and you have strategies for approaching each other when those guidelines are broken. And these strategies have to be things that don't involve being passive aggressive or nasty with each other. So check in regularly and really try to maintain that relationship so that you can stay on the same page. Magic Realist asked a question. She said, do you have advice for kindergarten classes with no sinks? For the washrooms are all the way down the hall. I think bathroom routines are always harder when you don't have a bathroom in your classroom. See if you can set up a system that lets your kids go on their own when they need to. When I taught pre-K, I did a lot of modeling about how to move in the hallway, how to wash your hands appropriately, and all that sort of thing for like the whole first month of school. We would take whole class bathroom trips first, and then after about a month, my kids were able to go on their own. So if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to ease up on control in this area. Because, bathroom and hand washing and all that kind of stuff will drive you crazy if you focus on it too much, or if you expect kids to have perfect behavior in this area. No matter what you do or what kind of system you set up, you are going to have kids playing in the hallway. You're going to have kids splashing water at the sink. At that age, you're going to have them singing loudly while they're on the toilet because they like to hear the echo. Like, they're just going to do kid things. But if you stay focused on the goal is allowing kids to meet their physical needs without taking your focus off of instruction, then you can design policies that will work well. So try to avoid anything that requires kids not being able to go when they need to, and avoid anything that interrupts your teaching. If your procedure lets you teach and lets them go, I would count it as good, even if it doesn't work perfectly every single time. Tara asks, what would you say is the hardest thing about being a first-year teacher? And how can first-year teachers start out strong? I feel like one of the hardest things about teaching, just in general, is trying to figure out what's important and what's not. Because the way that it's explained to you, when you're new, you're hearing about everything all at once, right? And every single thing feels like a matter of life or death. And it feels like you're going to lose your job and all the kids are going to fail and they're going to grow up and be hopeless losers if you don't do every single thing that you've been told to do. So if you want to start off strong, try to analyze everything through the lens of what is most important and give your best time and energy to those things. And when you don't know what's most important, you have to ask. So go to the teacher next door or the principal, the mentor, whoever it is you feel like is approachable and you can trust, and just say, I'm feeling overwhelmed because I got 5 things that I think we're supposed to have complete by tomorrow. Which of these absolutely has to be done by then? And which of them could be done later or skipped or maybe streamlined a little bit? Maybe there's some little trick where I could get this done faster or make it easier for myself. Try to find an experienced teacher in your school that you can trust and that you can go to honestly and ask them, tell me the truth. What's going to happen if I don't do this well? What's going to happen if I mess up on this? And I think you will be surprised at how often the answer is not very much or nothing at all. I mean, the principal, here's the little tip. Your principal is really busy too. Your principal does not have time to read every single person's lesson plans and check every single room for every single thing that is supposedly required. And also you might be making some assumptions about what needs to be done, or assumptions about how it needs to be done that are actually way more complicated than what is actually required. So ask someone else, how do you make this work so that it's not so time consuming? Look for those tricks and tips right away, rather than trying to do it all and then realizing later it's not going to be possible. I will save you the frustration and tell you right now, it's not going to be possible. You cannot do everything they're telling you need to do. So figure out what you're going to eliminate, or at least streamline a little bit so that the most important stuff does get done and it gets done on time. Happy Class asked, what's your biggest piece of advice for young teachers? If you want teaching to be a sustainable career for you, you have to focus on ways to make teaching fit into your life instead of trying to make life fit into your teaching. Because teaching is an all-consuming job, and there won't be any room left over for the rest of your life if you don't choose to prioritize those things. So decide how much time and energy and money you can really afford to dedicate to this profession. You got to set those boundaries for yourself. But know that those boundaries will change throughout your teaching career as you move through different stages of life. For the first part of my teaching career, I was single and I had no kids. So I enjoyed spending a lot more time on school then than I did later. I didn't have a lot going on. And I don't mean to imply that if you're single, you have nothing else going on, because I know that's a really hurtful stereotype sometimes. And, teachers who don't have kids sometimes get a very unfair workload because all the teachers who do have kids will push things over on them. So please don't think I'm saying that. I'm saying that in my situation, I actually didn't have a lot going on at that time. And I was able to devote the time to school. And I was doing things that I really enjoyed. It was by choice. And I also felt like when I was a young teacher, I had a lot more energy than I do now. And I'm glad that I invested a lot of my energy into becoming the best possible teacher that I could be, because that laid the groundwork for everything else I did later in my career. It made it so much easier for me to be successful later with a lot less effort. Everything that I'm saying to you now, this is just me speaking from the heart. This is just because I've been so immersed in this work. And I really put in the time and energy in the beginning. So depending on your current season of life and all the other obligations that you have on your time, it might make sense for you to put your teacher identity first for a while. And maybe the boundary you set is that it's not going to be like that forever. We're just going to do it like this for 1 year, and then we're going to reevaluate. We're going to see what's going on in my life next year, what's happening with my family, what's happening, with my personal life, what's my health like, and see what's reasonable next year. And make sure you're checking in with yourself regularly to make sure that what you're doing is working for you so that you don't burn out. Ms. K asks, how do we help the many kids with anxiety? I think that the kids pick up on and they emulate the emotions of the adults in their lives. Now, I'm not saying that adults are solely responsible for kids' anxiety. That's not it at all. But I am saying that we have a lot of influence on how kids feel. So we can intentionally create a calm classroom where we're not constantly talking about test scores or the threat of retention, where we're not screaming at kids across the room when they're not following directions, which can really stress out all the kids around them, right? All these little triggers that we know can make anxiety worse for kids. We can pay attention to those things. Notice what sets off the anxiety for the kids in your room. You can talk to the kids about them, ask questions. If they're young kids, help them find labels and descriptors for the way that they're thinking and feeling so that when something is making them feel anxious, they have that vocabulary and they have the trust to say to you privately, I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm feeling really stressed out right now. Can I go sit at the quiet spot in the class library? Figure out some sort of accommodation you can make for this sort of situation that the kids can just go, or they can ask you if they can just go. Other things that I did to try to create a calm classroom and minimize anxiety for kids as well as myself was I very rarely turned on those overhead fluorescent lights. They really stress me out. I hate that kind of lighting. So I used small lamps that were placed all around the classroom and lots of natural light from the windows when I was fortunate enough to have them. I played calm classical music throughout the day. When we did a class activity that was really rambunctious and loud, I followed up with something that was quieter and more introspective. So kids who maybe struggle with ADHD or ADD, people who are introverts, kids who struggle with anxiety, anyone who really can get easily overwhelmed in those loud kind of situations or get overstimulated, then had that moment to regroup. And I had an ability to regroup too. So be in tune with your kids. That's my best advice. And be really intentional about the way you structure your day and structure your classroom to be mindful of anxiety. I'm going to close with a question from A, who asked, what advice do you have for teachers on those very bad, no good days? If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to decompress as much as you can after dismissal or on your way home from school. And that way you're not bringing that energy into your home. Try to talk it out with one person, just one person, not the whole school. And preferably it's a colleague who really gets it versus a friend or a partner who's not a teacher, because that person is not going to really understand, right? And they may end up saying things that make it worse, and you may end up bringing stress into your relationships apart from school. So try to get it all out, process it while you're at school, and see if you can create a reframing thought about that day that will give you a sense of closure. My book, Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching, that has an entire chapter on this, where we talk about reframing those negative thoughts in a way that is still true, but just more empowering. So it might be something like this. It might be like, I made a big mistake today, but it's not the end of the world. I can forgive myself and move on and do better tomorrow. I refuse to keep replaying in my mind all the things that I could have done differently or all the things that I should have said. I accept the way that things happened, and I'm confident that I'm going to be able to recover from this. I am resilient, and I refuse to let this ruin my evening. So once you've figured out that reframing, you've repeated it a couple times to yourself, so you're starting to train your brain to think in that way, you're starting to believe it, and you've gotten yourself in hopefully a little bit better mood, then go home and don't allow yourself to think about it anymore. Dismiss any thoughts about it that come up. Don't allow yourself to talk about it all evening, or don't keep replaying those thoughts, because they're going to pop into your head. You've got to replace them with that reframing so that you can stay in that headspace that is positive. And try to take a break from work that evening if you can. Do some sort of self-care for yourself or self-comfort. Do something that is going to feel good and that's going to allow you to rest and recharge a little bit rather than trying to dive right back into work mode if there were things that you were hoping to get done that evening. It's okay to give yourself permission to do a little bit less on a bad day. I think you'll find that's more effective than just trying to power through as planned. You're not going to have the same mood. You're not going to have the same energy level as you were hoping. So just give yourself grace there. I hope this episode was helpful. And if it was, I would love for you to leave a review on iTunes to help spread the word to other teachers. And feel free to go to my Instagram story highlights anytime. You can ask a question there for a future episode like this. Or if you don't use Instagram, go to truthforteachers.com and you can leave a comment on the post for this episode and let me know your question there. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Want more than just a weekly podcast episode from me? I'd love to also send you a weekly message of encouragement via email. I'll reach out each Sunday evening with a short message that's designed to help you feel more prepared and inspired and motivated for the week ahead. It's not a newsletter or a bunch of announcements. This goes out to over 85,000 educators. So I put just as much thought into crafting this weekly written message to my email list as I do into crafting my podcast episodes. And it's entirely unique content that you won't find anywhere else online. Just go to thecornerstoneforteachers.com/subscribe and you can sign up. That's thecornerstoneforteachers.com/subscribe.